The Stalingrad is the first legendary tier ship to be obtainable outside of the Bureau. In a matter of a couple short weeks, it will become available for purchase in the store to the tune of 2 million global XP. Hello, I am Xarkun, and this is World of Warships Legends. Today we're going to talk about the Stalingrad. As usual, we will go over my mod selection, briefly examine my commander build, and take a look at the armor viewer before jumping into some gameplay where we will go over the ship's stats and how I think it is best played. I'll say that I think the Stalingrad is an incredibly powerful ship with some limitations that render it less versatile than the other super heavy cruisers in this game, like Alaska, Azuma, or Siegfried. Nevertheless, I believe it is worth every single one of the 2 million points of global XP it costs to get it, and I think giving this ship for an exorbitant amount of an ostensibly free-to-get currency of a free-to-play game is a nice gesture from the devs. Obviously, the price will be prohibitive to many casual or even regular players, but hardcore daily players may, at this point, have a huge stockpile of GXP, and I think they'll find the Stalingrad is a nice reward for all the hours they put into grinding out that GXP. Anyway, let's get started with our review of this ship by first taking a look at my mod selection. We've got Aiming Systems Mod 1 in the first slot, Steering Gears in the second, Concealment in the third, and Gun Range in the fourth slot. The commander build I'm using is Nikolai Kuznetsov with Mikawa and Yamamoto as inspirations. The good thing about this is that it's an entirely free commander build, no premium commanders at all, and I think it works very well. Now before we get into some gameplay, we're going to look at the armor viewer. Note that the Stalingrad has 32mm plating on the bow and stern with a 50mm icebreaker on the bow. It's got 50mm upper belt armor and 50mm deck armor in the center of the ship, as well as 180mm citadel protection armor. Basically, it is battleship level armor, and it's going to be good enough to tank most of the shots from any battleships you're going to come across. Of course, the Yamato can overmatch your bow. The citadel, though, as you can see, highly exposed. If you give broadside, you can be punished easily in this ship, but otherwise it is incredibly tanky. The tankiest cruiser in the game, I would say. Now, I said I have two games for you. The first one is just going to sort of provide us some background visualization as we go over these stats, which are frankly incredible. Now, note that the stats are the base stats, influenced only by my mod selection that I showed you in the beginning. I will note where my Nikolai Kuznetsov build comes in and changes things. And I don't think I'm really going to talk too much about this particular game that's playing in front of us, but the second game, we're going to call the shots in it as they happen. So, to begin with, you'll notice that the Stalingrad has a lot of hit points. 65,000 hit points at base, which I think makes it the cruiser with the highest number of hit points in the entire game. This is basically a Tier 7 battleship health pool. It's a lot of hit points, and basically no cruiser can touch it in terms of the number of hit points. It's also got 9 305mm guns. This is the same caliber of guns you'll find on the Alaska, the Azuma, and the Odin. They have a base range of 18 kilometers, which is already pretty long range, but I've got it up to 20.6 kilometers with Kuznetsov, which is an incredible range. I'm sure that the Alaska can probably get close to it if you build it for range, but across all my builds, this is the longest range that I have on any cruiser. It's got a 20-second reload, which puts it in line with the Alaska. The Azuma actually has a longer reload, and you might think 20 seconds is a long time, but it really doesn't feel cumbersome with these guns. I mean, just take a look at this shot on the Iowa out there. Okay, I guess that one wasn't so great, but I think we had one earlier where we hit him for like 15k or something. So this reload is fine. These are like battleship caliber guns, and frankly, the 20-second time feels fairly quick to me. Now, they've got a 30-second turret traverse time as well, which is also fairly quick, and the alpha strike on the AP shells is 8,000 9,500, although I've got that up to 9,180 with Kuznetsov's punch-through skill. Note, though, that the ship does not fire high explosive shells, only armor-piercing shells, and I think this may be some sort of balancing factor. This is the thing that I say makes it a little less versatile than the other heavy cruisers like Alaska, Azuma, and Siegfried. Siegfried, of course, has its torpedoes, but Alaska and Azuma both get high explosive, and the high explosive on the Azuma in particular is very good, while the high explosive on Alaska is, it's fine. It'll certainly get the job done. Stalingrad, though, no high explosive, only armor piercing, which means you're never going to be starting fires on ships unless you can get the ship into secondary range. Now, it does have secondaries. It has 12 of them, 130 millimeters in size with a 5.2 kilometer range, basically your typical Soviet destroyer guns, and they have an 8% fire chance for what it's worth. They're obviously not something you're going to be relying on, but because this ship is so heavily armored, you can absolutely push into most of the Tier 7 battleships you're going to face with no problem, because it has 32mm bow armor. And of course, the only ship that can overmatch 32mm bow armor in the game is Yamato. And even then, with this 50mm icebreaker, it may be difficult for the Yamato to actually hit your bow in such a way that it can strike your citadel. So, you go bow into a battleship, this thing becomes incredibly tanky, and you can absolutely get in there and brawl with some battleships. When you do, maybe your secondaries will fire, and maybe they'll start some fires on the enemies you're brawling with. Who knows? In any case, it's there, but you're not going to be starting fires with the main guns. No high explosive, and of course, that has the implication of making this ship, I suppose, less than effective against destroyers. Now, it does have the radar consumable. You can see I've got 3 of them with fully packed, the legendary skill on Kuznetsov. This is, of course, Soviet radar, which means it's a short duration, 15 seconds at base, but incredibly long spotting range, 11.7 kilometers. Now, Kuznetsov and the other Russian cruiser commander Makarov both have a skill called Intuitive, which I am running on this build. Intuitive gives you the RPF indicator arc. You can see it at the screen, pointing not towards the Peter Bagration out there, but at something else. I think the enemy Shimakaze. That's somewhere in that cap. So, RPF is nice on that skill, but the main crux of that skill is it increases the duration time for the radar consumable, and I think maybe the sonar consumable. Now, of course, Stalingrad doesn't have sonar either, which is another mark against it when it comes to facing destroyers. But the radar, 20 seconds with the intuitive skill, and 11.7 kilometer range. This Shimakaze out there is actually inside, well, he was inside my radar range. He slipped out of it, and he smoked up. But as long as we drive a little bit closer, we're going to be able to radar him for the benefit of the Khabarovsk, who actually is going to die here, and he sent me a message in German after the game. I think he felt like I didn't really help him out, but frankly, it's not my fault that he's that close to a Peter Bagration, another Russian cruiser that can deal with DDs a little bit more effectively than this one. In any case, no HE, going to be somewhat difficult to deal with destroyers. As far as I understand, the armor-piercing shells on this ship are short-fused, but I haven't really gotten any full penetrations against destroyers. You can see there, over-penetrations, that's about what you're going to expect. And since over-penetrations do 10% of the damage of the armor-piercing shell's Alpha Strike, then you're looking at about 980 damage per shell on a destroyer if you are running the build that increases the Alpha Strike with Punch Through on Kuznetsov. So, a little bit difficult to deal with destroyers, but the radar, of course, is incredibly deadly to those destroyers. Note, though, that my concealment on the Stalingrad, at base, it is 13 kilometer detectability by sea, but I've got it down to 12.3 kilometers with the Mikawa inspiration, which makes a difference of only just over half a kilometer between the detection range and the radar range. So, if you get spotted and you were previously unspotted, then you know that maybe there's a destroyer within 12.3 kilometers of you. Keep sailing in the direction that your RPF indicator is pointing at, provided that it is pointing at the destroyer spotting you, and soon enough you'll be in range to radar it and cause it lots of trouble and grief. So, concealment, not exactly the strong suit of this ship, but it's so heavily armored that it doesn't really mind being spotted all that much, provided you position it correctly. Let's talk about the maneuverability of this ship, though, because you might notice that it's pretty sluggish in the turns as you're watching this here. It's got a 35-knot top speed, which is actually quite good, I think, especially given the size of this ship. It's about the size of an actual battleship. It's really more a battleship than it is a cruiser, honestly. So 35-knot top speed, that's actually pretty quick and pretty good, I would say. But the turning circle, 1,130 meters, by far the longest or widest turning circle of any cruiser in this game at all. It's even longer than most of the battleships in this game. So the ship is not great at turning on a dime, let's just say. Although it has a 10-second rudder shift, which I suppose for the size of this ship actually seems pretty good. And you could, I suppose, decrease that even further by speccing into it with your commander build and make it a little better, and that may be a good way to go, honestly. It may help you angle the armor better if you're fighting several battleships. I think the last thing we have left to talk about as this game winds down is the anti-aircraft defense rating, which has an overall rating of 97, and it's got some pretty long-range anti-aircraft guns. Those 12 secondaries that I talked about earlier act as dual-purpose anti-aircraft mounts, and they have a range of 5.7 kilometers with an average DPS of 167. Now, I haven't really run into many aircraft carriers in the course of the 10 or 15 games I've played in the Stalingrad, so it's really hard for me to say how effective these guns truly are against aircraft, but I suspect that they're probably pretty good. So there's all the stats and the information that you need to know about the Stalingrad over this game, which, as you can see, is a pretty solid game. We ended with 3 kills, 125,000 damage. I think it's about to stop here right now. And, well, it's going to stop in a second. And we used all 3 of our radar consumables to counter that Shimakaze. Unfortunately, we couldn't really help out our Khabarovsk friend, but a fairly effective game in the Stalingrad, if kind of dull, which is why I used it as the background to talk about the stats. In the next game, we're going to call the shots and see how, playing this ship goes. I think, again, this is a very powerful ship, even despite the lack of high explosive. I think it's worth the 2 million global XP, and I find this a very fun ship to play. In fact, I'm pretty disappointed. I've got it on loan from Wargaming for only a week, so next week, Monday, they're going to take it out of my port and out of the ports of all the other community contributors, and then we will have to pay for it in global XP just like everybody else, and I have nowhere near 2 million global XP, so it's going to be a while before I can get this ship back, but I definitely want to get it back. It's pretty good. Now, the main game for this review is going to be on Sleeping Giant. It's a domination mode game. You can see that there's an enemy Stalingrad on the red team, played by CDR Skunk, who has a patch with the World of Warships Legends logo that says crew. So I assume this man is Wargaming staff, and he's taken the Stalingrad out for a spin or something. I don't think he's a community contributor. He's not a name I recognize. In any case, you might be familiar with this game. You might recognize it from my stream yesterday during the update. It was a pretty excellent game in the Stalingrad, actually, and it opens up with this Yamato furiously pinging me for support, which I don't really understand. He's on the other side of the map, as you can see, and I have spawned on the opposite side of the map from him. And one thing I advocate that you don't do is leave the side you spawn on. Isn't there a big-time YouTuber who covers this game? I think he's got like 30,000 subscribers or something. Doesn't he spend most of his time, or a lot of the time, saying in his commentaries over his videos, and I think I may be paraphrasing when I say, quote, "win your side," end quote. That man is Spartan Elite 43, and the advice he gives there is sage, which is why we're not leaving this side. We are, in fact, sailing to the east near the Alpha Cap. Although, I think it's going to become clear here soon that we're really not going to get much support from our teammates on this side. We are spotted, and so we are going to end up turning around and giving that Yamato the support he is desperately asking for eventually. It looks like an enemy Yamato is out there, and somebody sneaks a horribly sneaky shot over that island there. Hits me for 32k right in the broadside. I do believe that was a Citadel, courtesy of that Yamato out there, who, that honestly, sir, that was an excellent shot. You should be commended for that. Good job. Wasn't expecting it at all. But you can see what happens if you give too much broadside to enemy battleships. We lost half of our hit points there, so you do have to be careful. I said this ship was tanky, and it is, but if you give broadside, it can be very easily punished, as you've seen there. So, 2 Yamatos out there. We know that we have the 50mm icebreaker, but they can overmatch our bows, and our side armor, provided we angle it toward them, it will bounce their shells. Nevertheless, there are 2 of them, and going at them alone, without really the support of this battleship over here, or this Suzuya out there, it's not going to be fruitful for us. So we are going to turn around and go to the other side of the map. In any case, these guys don't really seem to be a threat to the Alpha Cap at all. We've got a destroyer in Bravo who looks like he's going to be able to secure it, and then hopefully he can move into Alpha safe with the Yamatos behind that island there. Now, how do I really recommend you play this ship? I suppose that is what we should talk about as we move toward the other side of the map. Well, basically, I'd say the Stalingrad is much more a battleship than it is a cruiser. I would almost classify it as a light battleship in a way that a heavy cruiser is sort of like a light battleship, but even more pronounced than that, because there is no other cruiser in this game with this kind of armor. You can successfully bow tank every battleship at tier 7 and every legendary battleship aside from the Yamato with your 32mm side armor. You got that, or bow armor rather, you got that 50mm side plating and 50mm deck plating, which can be angled against the Yamato and any other battleship to ricochet their shells. Plus, the 50mm also has the added benefit of being fairly resistant to a lot of high explosive, especially destroyer high explosive and light cruiser high explosive if it's not German and if it's not being influenced by the equilibrium of power skill. That being said, the Stalingrad does have a fair amount of superstructure. Ooh, look at that enemy Stalingrad there, demonstrating to us again why you don't want to give broadside in this thing. We get a Citadel on him. Sorry, Wargaming staff member, but you're going to go down now as soon as these guns are reloaded. This guy's charging in, no hit points left, and so, yeah. As tanky as the Stalingrad may be, and as battleship-esque as the armor scheme may be, you certainly don't want to sail it in to 4, 5 enemy ships, because you're not going to survive that long. Doesn't matter how much Russian armor you've got, you're not going to stand up to firepower from multiple ships that you can't all angle against. So, armor's good, very good in one-on-one duels, a little bit resistant to HE, certainly capable of bouncing battleship armor-piercing shells. The maneuverability on this ship, as I said, not great. Massive turning circle. You got to pre-plan your turns by several hours, you know. And the rudder shift, not, you know, super responsive, but actually I think quite good for a cruiser. So this all amounts to playing this essentially like a battleship. Maybe a more faster battleship or a quicker battleship. Certainly not a more maneuverable battleship, but a light battleship with really hard-hitting guns and radar, too. Long range, rather short duration radar. So basically, I think you want to rely on the range that you have on these guns, which is excellent, and you want to rely on their incredible ability to penetrate at range. These shells have a wicked fast velocity. I have no idea what it is because it doesn't tell you in-game, but they don't take a very long time to travel to their target at all. They have the typical Soviet ballistic characteristics where they go kind of flat. They sort of, rise up at a little bit of an angle, but then they come down like missiles shot from a jet aircraft into the sides of the ship you're aiming at. Now, of course, since they're 305 millimeters, they don't really have much overmatch potential. There may be some light cruisers that you face that you can overmatch, but I don't think so. I don't think 305 millimeter guns can overmatch 25 millimeters of armor, and that's probably the light cruiser value that you'd find on something like, the Cleveland or something else at tier 7, so you don't really have any overmatch potential, but you do have excellent penetration, and I think you might have improved penetration angles as well. I'm not entirely sure on that, but you do have excellent penetration, and I think you have short-fused penetration too. So as long as ships are giving you an angle at which you can penetrate them, you can do wicked amounts of damage. Now, the only real problem with this ship is the lack of high explosive. So if you've got a bow-in battleship, like a Tirpitz or a Richelieu or a Jean Bart, and you're facing them bow-on, you don't want to make that a long, protracted engagement, because there's really not much you can do to a bow-in or a bow-tanking battleship with the Stalingrad, since you don't have access to HE. What you have to do is try to aim at their turrets and see if you can take those out, and sometimes this thing absolutely can knock out battleship turrets, or you have to aim at the superstructure and hope to get some penetration damage on that. That's the only way you're really going to do damage with your AP to a bow-tanking battleship. And the lack of HE makes things a little less versatile. Of course, if you had that, the HE, then you could switch to that and start burning the enemy bow-tanking battleship to death. So I'm almost kind of glad this thing doesn't have HE, because what would a battleship do to this thing if it was bow into them, firing HE every 20 seconds, lighting fires, probably getting crap tons of penetration damage? I don't know. So it may be a good balancing choice that this thing doesn't have HE. Certainly the AP makes you think a little bit more and forces you to find positions on the map where you can get broadside shots. You got to move around, you can't just wait for the broadsides to come to you. You got to go out there and find them. That is the way of battleship and heavy cruiser play. However, when you're bow into enemy battleships, I will tell you that if you start seeing Stalingrads out there, you start facing them, and you shoot armor piercing at them bow in, well, you also probably aren't going to get any damage on them at all unless you hit their superstructure or take out their turrets. And that may be a very frustrating position to be in if you are a battleship facing this cruiser. But you have an advantage over the Stalingrad that it does not have over you, and that is you have high explosive shells. Any battleship at tier 7 shooting high explosive will be easily able to penetrate the 32 millimeters of armor on the Stalingrad's bow with their high explosive shells, and with those shells they can probably rack up a lot of damage by penetrating the bow or even the superstructure and start fires. That will be the weakness of the Stalingrad: fires and high explosive damage. That is how you will need to counter this thing if you find a particularly stuck in one and you're playing a battleship. Note, however, that there is one criticism I have with the balance of this ship. I said that I think it might be a good idea that they didn't give it high explosive, but if you do get lit on fire in the Stalingrad, you only have a 30-second fire duration, which is cruiser fire duration. Battleships burn for 60 seconds, Stalingrad only for 30 seconds. Now, the Stalingrad has a battleship health pool, and battleship level armor, and even battleship caliber guns. But it gets a cruiser burning penalty when it gets lit on fire. This seems like something that should be adjusted in my mind. It should be 45 seconds or even 60 seconds, just because of how tanky and how powerful this ship truly is. In any case, we've racked up 82,000 damage so far, 3 citadels in the Stalingrad here. Not a super impressive amount of damage, but I think right now against this Yamato, we're going to see exactly what these guns can do and the havoc they can wreak. There are 2 Yamatos out there, actually. They're pushing in. We Citadel 1 for 12k, which, you know, that's not like the biggest amount of damage ever, but just the penetration of these guns. This guy is sitting 14 kilometers away from us. Broadside, we got 305mm guns. They penetrate so nicely, and you can get citadels from even further ranges than that. Also, I would say the accuracy on these guns, it's not, you know, cruiser level accuracy, I suppose you could say. A lot of the times, or sometimes, the shells go wonky. They disperse almost like German dispersion pattern, and they're not always the most accurate thing in the world, but sometimes they get really tight shell grouping, really good dispersion, and they laser in on the target like, you know, the best salvos you get from Russian battleships. Think Lenin, for example, the premium tier 7 Russian battleship, and that thing's accuracy, if you've ever played it or you've ever seen it played, you know that you don't even need to build into the accuracy on that ship. It is so ridiculously accurate, more accurate than most of the Russian battleships. There's 3 citadels, by the way, on that Yamato, and that's a hefty amount of damage. 3 citadels and 6 full penetrations. That is all 9 shells crashing into his broadside. Brings our damage total up to 129,000. We are in the Charlie Cap in the process of taking it, as these Yamatos are in Bravo, and at a second ago I would have thought that maybe they had a chance of winning this game, but now they've gone down to 2 ships versus us. Take a look, by the way, at this Jean Bart, who is somewhat angled. Notice that we only get 1 ricochet. We get 3 over penetrations and 3 regular penetrations, which leads me into believing, like I said, that this ship may have better penetration angles than your typical cruiser. Jean Bart now turning into us to open up his angle even more, results in his death. There's our second kill of the game. We're up to 148,000 damage, and that just leaves the Yamato left. So, closing thoughts on the Stalingrad. Incredibly powerful cruiser. Basically, I wouldn't even think of it as a cruiser. I would think of it as an incredibly powerful battleship with radar. That's really how I would describe it. Played more like a battleship than like a cruiser. Massive ability to do damage with these excellent guns. A threat, at least a spotting threat, a severe spotting threat to destroyers with its radar. And I think worth every point of the 2 million global XP price tag. And frankly, I'm kind of glad the price tag is prohibitive. I don't think this is necessarily going to be the easiest ship for people to play, and if you want to have success in it, you probably do have to have some amount of experience in this game, and in order to get this ship, you do need experience. Even if you're going to convert Elite XP into Global XP to buy it, you still need to acquire enough Elite XP to buy it by playing the game. So, I like this ship a lot. I like the way Wargaming has released it, despite the fact that I'm not going to be able to get it soon, and I hope you enjoyed this video. If so, give it a thumbs up. Thank you so much for watching. Consider subscribing if you haven't already, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.